has been a very busy week, with tons of activity, a lot of creativity flowing, a lot of excitement, a lot of ideas going around. And I just want to give, before I really get started, a real thank you to the designers that came and gave their expertise and talent to us this week. Of course, starting with Christian Sotil, who you will hear from here in a minute, but also Hugh Petters with Adams Architecture, Ben Pentreath with Ben Pentreath Design, that Welsh name I'm having a hard time with, but also Vince Graham and our city staff who have really leaned in, particularly Josh Martin. I think if any of you all have seen him this week, he's been like the Energizer Bunny running around. But I think it's been quite a success. We didn't know exactly how it would go. This is a first for many of us, including the city of Charleston. And for that, I want to say thank you to my city council. We've got Keith Waring and Ross Appel, I believe, here in the audience, and maybe Councilman Polke is here too, or was earlier. Anyway, and then we got him there. Okay, great. So again, appreciate you all's support on this effort. So one of the questions that I've gotten during this week a couple of times is kind of why this, why now? And you know, I think the short answer is we have to do it. We really don't have a choice from my perspective. As I've told many of you, this was not a topic that I was overly informed on, and a huge part of my campaign running for this office 2.5 years ago. But since being in office and meeting with different companies, individuals, businesses, touring around various communities, neighborhoods, etc., it's become abundantly clear that affordability is not just, you know, something you talk about anymore. It is a very real social, cultural, economic problem that we have. And it is something that we have to be very aggressive on addressing. Indeed, when I talk to people, I mean, it's one of three things. It's traffic, it's flooding, or it's affordability. And on the affordability point, I mean, what I would say is again, this is especially true for me, who grew up here, and my two children are both in college right now, and I suspect will want to come back here. But invariably, countless times in conversations I have with people that have grown up here or that have lived here a long time, and simply put, or parents who have raised their children here, and their children cannot afford to come back here. That's a problem. We are failing on many levels when that is the case. And so we have to be aggressive. I think we have to be bold because, and this is not meant as a criticism of the way it's been done. Indeed, we have done pretty innovative things in the past in terms from Riley to Tecklenburg. And the bottom line, though, is especially over the past decade and really since post-COVID, what we are doing is not working. It is not addressing the issue. It is making a dent here and there. It is making us feel better, like we are acting, and we are, without question. But in terms of the numbers and the data, it is not addressing the problem holistically. So this is something that I think we need to try and break the cycle on. And again, this is not something that the city of Charleston is alone in. I mean, you hear more and more about affordability from Democrats and Republicans at the federal level, state level. It's being talked about a lot more, and it needs to be because, again, if you are growing in the United States, generally speaking, you have this problem. And so, again, how do we break this cycle? And I give you 2 points. First, I think we need to demand better. We don't want to settle for anything that, as Joe Riley said, isn't beautiful. We need to marry form and function. And what's become abundantly clear to me, at least this week, watching these people from outside our community come in and help us design what you will see tonight, we are a living example of a beautiful built environment, a built environment that is the envy of the world. So we don't have to look very far for examples of what works. And for generations, particularly on the peninsula, this was an area that by and large had an incredibly diverse socio and economic makeup. And it's only in recent years, only in the past 25 years, that has abruptly changed. So we have examples of what works. And I think we would be stupid not to follow what is already proven to be a success. And second, and now we're in the weeds a little bit, but the way affordable housing development is set up in the United States today, and I've become quite a student of it over these past 2 years, is broken. Again, this is something where deal structures with developers that come in who typically do have good motivation and want to do the right things, but ultimately they have huge fees associated with their services. They have ridiculously lopsided economics and with nominal money in the deal. It's mostly public funding that goes into these efforts. And I can't really fault them because it's a system that, generally speaking, affordable units are oftentimes well over what it costs to build a market rates unit because of the bureaucracy and the time it takes to get from A to B. And so that is something that is often priced into a proposal from any given developer. So for me, it is time that we break that mold. We create a new normal. This is something, as you all have heard, we are working with HUD on. They are excited by it. And again, the actual deal points and structures are still a bit of a work in progress, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end here. But bottom line is, it's time to think differently. And so I want to just wrap up my opening conversations or opening remarks with a few key principles and perspectives that are sacrosanct, at least for me, and I suspect my council members as well, and perhaps many of you as well, as we move this ball forward from watercolors to AutoCAD. And that is, number one, there will be no displacement of existing residents, particularly on housing authority properties. There's been a lot of misinformation and confusion about that, but you'll see here tonight how what the existing unit count that the housing authority properties have across our peninsula will be replicated and then added to. So no displacement. We will, before we move anybody out of their homes, we will build a new building that they can move into immediately adjacent, within a football throw, right? So that is an important distinction that I want to make abundantly clear because of, again, a lot of misinformation that has been out there. Number two, and I alluded to this earlier, we need to demand something beautiful. We need to not just tolerate that it's affordable housing and we have to deal with it. The slides, if you all were here on the first night that Josh Martin showed, where the top 3 award winners in the country for affordable housing, first, second, and third place, were up on the screen. And not one of them, I guarantee you, would pass our BAR. Not one. We need to demand beauty. Our built environment is one of our greatest assets, and we need to do something that will enhance that, not just be tolerated by that. So sticking to something beautiful is an essential part of this effort. Third, we need to eliminate as much risk as we can. And when I say risk, that's risk to the city in terms of the unknown, in terms of what will ultimately be delivered. That is why we are so heavily involved in the design process. It's not because I just want to play developer. It is because we as a community know what works in our city. So we need to have a heavy hand in that effort. And that's what this whole week has been about. That's what me going to different neighborhoods over the next several months, talking about these, getting people's ideas as the plans evolve is essential to do. So eliminating our risk on terms of what the end product will be, but also eliminating the risk, and this is important because it tracks to the economics, eliminating the risk that the private sector will have coming in. Again, I talked about the high fees and the ridiculous economics that affordable housing developers often get in these types of projects. And that's because they typically will take 3 to 5 years of doing due diligence, design costs, et cetera, going through an entitlement process that costs them a lot of money and a lot of risk that they may never recoup, because oftentimes affordable housing projects don't end up working out, so that's just sunk costs. So it's like drug companies that do research on a drug that may or may not get to market, and that's why they have the pricing so high. So again, if you eliminate a lot of that risk and bring certainty to the capital markets and the private sectors that come in, that is priced into their cost of capital. And then finally, on a similar note in terms of the economics, economies of scale. If we were up here talking about 300 or 400 units, or hell, even 500 units, it wouldn't work. But what we're talking about now is over 5,000 units, half of which would be permanently deed restricted for affordability. The other half would be market. That brings economies to scale. It brings economies to scale on the design front. It brings economies of scale in the construction front. It brings huge economies of scale on the capital markets front. All of those make a huge difference. And so those 4 guiding principles, no displacement, ensuring beauty, eliminating as much risk as possible, and bringing in economies of scale as we move forward are the compass, if you will, that I have now to make this, albeit very ambitious endeavor, but it is grounded in reality, and I do think this is something that we can show the rest of the country how to do it. So again, I'm excited now to turn it over to let you see some of the fruits of all the labor this week. So I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Christian Sotil. Christian?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening on a Friday afternoon. This is amazing. We've got a great turnout. I see a lot of folks that have been following us through the week. I want to thank you all for doing that. It's been an incredible week, and we have turned our attention toward design and meeting that challenge. So I'm still standing myself, and our team members that are with us are still standing as well, but it's been an incredible week. So I'm going to take you all through. For some of the folks that maybe are just joining us tonight for the first time, I'm going to hit some of the high points of what led to the Charrette, all the many, many months of preparation, and then what we've learned so far. This is our work in progress presentation. In fact, I am going to say everything that you see tonight is a draft, okay? In fact, the ink or the watercolor in some cases is still wet. But this took partnership, and I really, hats off to the leadership here in Charleston, the city, the Charleston Housing Authority, the West Edge Foundation in Charleston County. I think this unique sort of synthesis, seeing eye to eye on this issue, this problem, could only happen when that understanding is shared, and I think that's very exciting. We've been very fortunate, very honored really to be here as a part of this process, and as the mayor mentioned, joined by Hugh Petter, Ben Pentreath, Vince Graham, and also some of the team members from Historical Concepts have been here this week as well. Josh Martin presented some of the background that goes back to the work that Bloomberg did that helped provide the focus on where housing would best be placed in Charleston as the community moves forward. And based on all of the factors and the metrics around where that growth is best suited, it brought a focus for that housing strategy to the Upper Peninsula and to areas that are underutilized today, but also served by transit and in closer proximity to nearby services. So the most sustainable way to make the peninsula more complete. And as Josh Martin shared earlier in the week, what makes this effort so unique is not just talking generally about it, but going address by address to find the way to meet that target. Just in summary, there's approximately 1,000 affordable housing units in some either completed, nearing completion, or under development. Those are being tracked. The work that we've been doing is focusing on, let's say, approximately 2,500 new affordable units, which leads us to that goal of 5,000, so that we would have 50% affordable new housing alongside market rate housing in a completely mixed environment. So that's been our goal, is the new targeted sites in our work with Charleston Housing Authority as well. Those three areas that we're primarily focused on are shown on the map here: Western, Central, and Eastern Peninsula, and we'll get into more detail as we go. And the team here at the city has been looking at how to map address by address, but also year by year, to be able to clearly articulate that goal of 3,500 affordable housing units by 2032. So those are the guiding principles of it. We talked about this a bit earlier in the week, but really developing that 50-50 market rate in affordable housing, reaching densities that are roughly in that 80 units per acre. And we've been studying that this week, and I'll report what we've learned. But really having a fully mixed use, mixed income environment, and that those affordable units would be in perpetuity. So all that is sort of the underpinning to the work that lies ahead. And as we mentioned on Monday, this question of affordable housing is really at a crossroads. And Charleston has been truly a leader over a long period of time in providing quality housing that will age well, 100-year housing, whether we look at Enston Homes or Robert Mills Manor, as we look back in time. And then the pioneering work of Mayor Riley in looking for ways in his time to provide housing that was on scattered sites throughout the city, that was housing of Charleston, housing that you'd be proud to call home. And I think that call to action of Mayor Riley is that we must use that word beauty, and I appreciate Mayor Cogswell reminding us of that tonight. This week there's been a lot of focus on that very word as we've talked about design. This is a cautionary tale, and I am gonna show these to you. I think you need to see them if you didn't see them already. This is what's being held up around the nation as the model, as what we ought to do. The 2025 winners are, and I think, you know, the idea that these would never work in Charleston, these would never make it through the BAR process is a good way to think about that. But this is a very challenging moment that we're in, because the solutions that are being offered are sort of a warehouse Costco solution to affordable housing. These are not necessarily places that summon the word beauty immediately. In fact, maybe not at all. So there has to be a better way, and that way is right here in this incredible city. So our greatest teacher is actually the city itself, and the lessons continue to reveal themselves the more we look. I do want to illustrate this idea to underscore the idea all of this housing will be replacement housing, but there will be no displacement in that. And a part of that, an important part of that, is the fact that we are working in partnership where we do have adjacent parcels that in many cases are vacant parcels. So you would have underscaled, underperforming homes that are in need of replacement, where next door you would have a completely vacant site. So what this envisions is that the new construction would be able to start to fill in those missing teeth, fill in those gaps, those vacant sites, so that those residents can literally stay right there in the neighborhood and have every single one of those homes replaced right there in the neighborhood. So the new construction would be what's called build first. That new construction is what comes first in order to create the housing to allow for residents to stay right there in the neighborhood, to move into new housing. What then follows is the opportunity to take that housing that is in need of redevelopment and to, in fact, then redevelop that in a way that is truly of Charleston, so that we end up in total with a more complete city and a more mixed-use environment, and one that really meets its place in the heart of the Charleston Peninsula and its connectivity to all the benefits of being in a well-connected, walkable urban street network. So that's, in summary, how we're describing that idea of build first, so that we understand that there is no displacement in this approach. So these are the focus areas. We've talked about them a bit on Monday. Our open house on Wednesday helped us to move around and talk to neighbors and leaders in each of the areas, whether it's West Edge, or whether it's the Central Peninsula, which is a variety of properties, or whether it's the Eastern Peninsula, again, a variety of properties. There are in total 7 areas that we've studied this week. And we've done it in this format, this collaborative design format. Here we are. We've made it to Friday. What a week. And it's been made up of a number of things. Our design studio has been just around the corner. We know we've seen a lot of folks that have stopped in and spent time with us during the week. We've had these formal events here at the Dock Street, which has been amazing and an incredible place to do it. We started with our kickoff meeting on Monday, our open house on Wednesday. We've had lectures through the week. And that's where our studio has been, much neater in the beginning. And then, of course, being here was a great gift. We had an evening lecture schedule. Hugh Petter, Ben Pentreath, and Vince Graham each spoke on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night. I believe those videos, if they're not already, will be posted on the Project 3500 website through the City of Charleston. So if you didn't have a chance to listen to them, they were each wonderful talks. This was our kickoff meeting. Hugh Petter speaking about his work in Nansleddon and other locations in the UK, but really focused on affordability and some of his experiences. In fact, recently received the Ray Gindros Award for affordable housing. Just incredible talent, incredible perspective to bring to us. Ben Pentreath's talk covered as well his work in the affordable housing space and his work in really focusing on good design and beauty in all of that work, whether it's work he's done at Poundbury in the UK or in Tornagrain and many other examples that he shared with us on Tuesday. And then Vince Graham, truly someone that has shown the way in Charleston through his career, has been with us through the week, making those connections, helping us to see some of the most unique things of this city. Again, many thanks to the mayor for spending time, not just in these evening sessions, but coming through the studio, spending time with us throughout the entire week. So this is the third part of this kickoff for design, this charrette that we've been on. And I wanted to share just a bit about what we've done through the week. This is going back to Monday, spending time on the ground, moving through multiple neighborhoods, but really starting with some of the oldest neighborhoods. Some of the clearest lessons we believe actually can be found in some of the oldest neighborhoods. The scale of housing being a human scale, its relationship to the street and to the sidewalk, its ability to provide beauty and durability that it only gets better with time, not worse. So we actually spend time, this is Robert and Nate literally measuring buildings as we toured through the city, looking at some of the areas in the mid-blocks that provide new opportunities for smaller housing to be brought into those large city blocks that you often find here in Charleston. So that site tour reminded us of the best of the old city, even took us to some areas. This is Catfiddle Street up in the Cannonboro-Elliottboro neighborhood, which is an example of new infill, but new infill inspired by the very traditions of this city. In fact, Andrew Gould here sharing some of his stories and his experiences with the team, reminding us just how compact good human habitat is. This is not something you measure on paper, but you measure it in the field. We've had many technical meetings back in the studio where we could really focus on issues that were around a particular topic, where we had whether it was city staff, whether it was construction techniques and methodologies, with the idea of this program being something that can be executed at a scale that creates efficiency in construction. So we had focus meetings around that topic. We had focus meetings with housing partners, institutional partners here in Charleston. We had the development community do a roundtable with our team to talk about their questions, their perspective on the work ahead. We had preservationists and neighborhood leaders in a technical meeting. And we also had building arts partners. I think this is really important. Charleston, its legacy of building well is certainly known to us as we spend time in the city, but it's doing it again. It's continuing to hold the way we build high and creating a model for the nation. And that starts at the American College of Building Arts, and in fact now is extending into the programming at Burke High School here on the peninsula as they start to develop programs in the artisanal trades, the kinds of trades that make a beautiful built environment. That's very exciting as we think about the opportunity ahead, and an opportunity that really gives back directly to the community. In fact, we need the community to be involved in this program. So that's an issue very close to my heart. So some of the technical meetings, some photographs here in the design studio. Well attended. Again, I see a lot of familiar faces here that have been with us through the week. I want to thank you all again for being a part of those meetings. And each one, we always learned something that would then continue to inform the work as we proceeded forward. So we've got just a few photographs from those meetings. Want to thank leadership as well. Councilman Polke and Councilman D'Alessandro came, and I think actually Councilman D'Alessandro literally wore a jersey to explain how corner stores work in Charleston. Very helpful. So we made sure that made it to paper straight away. And that feedback kept coming through the week. And I think that's really the point. That is why we work this way. We call it design in the sunshine. It's so that we can get that feedback in multiple instances while everything is still fresh and top of mind. So it's been a great collaborative process. And in the studio, the design team has been just tremendous watching them work. So this is just some snapshots of the studio as things were underway. Hugh Petter at a drawing board. I think we also have to remember some of the team members that we have here are very busy, and the ability to get them to sit down at a drawing board for a week was in fact a gift for us and a gift for them too. So we got a lot of drawing done the old-fashioned way with human hands. And that gave us a way to talk about the work as it was progressing. Had a number of local architects too that came to the studio to share their perspective and to give us ideas and to talk through their experiences here in Charleston. So this is the way we did it. Drawing. If you want to make the environment, a built environment, a work of art, you need to make it as if it is a work of art. And so it's so exciting. You're going to see some of the images that I have scanned, and we have others pinned up out in the parlor after the talk. We can look at those a little bit closer. So Hugh Petter and Sophia Kelleher here explaining their design for a very small house that could be tucked in among existing trees in one of those sites. So we would pin up over and over again, exchange ideas, refine those ideas. So what you're seeing has already been through a number of iterations. This is Nate hastily adding some watercolor to a beautiful elevation that you'll see out in the parlor later on. On Wednesday, we appreciate everyone coming together for the open house review right here in the courtyard. It was a beautiful afternoon to do that. We had images pinned up out in the courtyard. We had some of the site, the background for the sites pinned up in the parlor. So we got a lot of feedback that evening as well. And then back to the drawing boards. And the studio just got messier and messier as we went along. We tried to keep it organized. But what was really interesting was we were developing typologies, studying buildings from small to large, but then we were starting to study what each of these sites calls for and how that would work. So I'm going to share that with you as we go through these images. But it's been a great gift getting to work right here, right on Meeting Street in Charleston. So we started with this idea that housing comes in all shapes and sizes. That's certainly what the old city teaches us. So this idea that the smallest Charleston single home or the corner store, which is so emblematic of the city, or row homes at a larger scale, or smaller apartment homes, maybe 12 units or 6 units. Then we start to move into larger buildings that have housing, but they're still not too large. Or maybe buildings like old schools. You could certainly think of the Chisholm Street School as an example of that also serves very well for housing. And then some larger examples as well, but examples that are broken into multiple pieces. So that's where we began, sort of this idea that each of these types has a place, and we needed to study that. We need to study examples of how those types could be adapted and could be used as we work on this project. So these are kind of the overview of those different types. The medium-sized apartments, slightly larger apartment buildings, and then you might say the largest, but still of Charleston is what we were called to do as a design team. So I'm going to start by sharing some of the architectural studies, and then I'm going to go to the site plan. That more or less mirrors how we were starting to move into the process. And this work, as I said, is everything you see is a study and is a draft. So please understand that. But I'd like to share some of what we learned, because it's been quite a process, sort of studying what does a street look like that's composed of buildings of different scales, from some of the smallest singles to larger Charleston format buildings that could accommodate flats, perhaps. All of that fits, and all of that, in fact, feels very comfortable side by side. That's some examples that would be on blocks that might front existing historic residential parts of the neighborhood, so that you have a sense of balance as you go down that street. We started to look at some larger format buildings as well. Again, all building types that we can observe and learn from as we look at the old city. And as we start to move up to slightly larger buildings, again, buildings that are legible, buildings that are beautiful, buildings that are worth falling in love with. So these are the kinds of studies each of the designers was working, looking at precedent, looking at the idea of creating multiple formats, multiple sizes, but then how that same building type could be repeated. Because I think repetition is a big hallmark. We often decry repetition today, say, oh, you're not allowed to repeat. I think Ben Pentreath really hit that point home. This is our very DNA. It's where we come from, and if it's beautiful, repeating something beautiful is not a bad idea. I think we're often upset because we're repeating ugly things, but repeating beauty, we should do that as much as possible. So as we studied these, we were looking in some cases at unique examples, maybe one-off buildings or buildings that would serve a civic purpose. In this case, sort of how a larger building could be framed around multiple masses that create setbacks, that create an up and down movement in the skyline. But then also just very simple buildings. In this case, a building that opens up to retail at the street and has just simple flats above. Often, I think it's the simplest buildings that have the greatest lessons to teach. And looking again from the smallest to the largest. This is a 14-foot wide, tiny single house. A larger home that would serve very well for flats, but still very visually manageable, something that would be appropriate here in Charleston. And these drawings, as you can see, are all of many hands, and I think that's so important as well. This is a city built by many hands over many years. So having the number of examples to share tonight is really kind of a gift to show many perspectives on how something like this could take shape. From the smallest homes, the muse homes or lane homes or alley homes, to larger homes that could support multiple apartments within a very beautiful and very legible building form. Row homes. And then small cottages again that could be in an alley, just a single unit or maybe 2 units. So it's quite a diversity here. We do have these pinned up outside, so I'd love to get your feedback directly after the talk. But I wanted to share some of these images with you tonight. I think also a reminder, I love starting to see combinations of buildings because you realize there's a great sort of visual comfort to seeing that range of architecture side by side. It's something very familiar here in Charleston, how many iterations there are on a theme. But you often find the core is a very simple form. So that is a very replicable element where it's the details and the ornament. Maybe it's the storefront or the window headers or the porches that make it unique. So the designers began sketching how these combinations of buildings might work block by block as we started to look at specific sites as case study sites for Project 3500, with the idea that you don't put all the buildings of one type in one place, but in fact, you scatter those buildings' scales throughout the block structure, and it starts to feel very organic. I think one sign of success would be if you look at a Google aerial view that you would not be able to find housing sites that had been redeveloped or vacant sites that had been redeveloped. They would mesh with the city fabric all around. And so we kept going. So while building types were being studied, we began to study site plans as well. And studying, in fact, I love this image. This is something that Hugh worked on, which appears at first glance as 6 buildings side by side. What you find, there are actually only 3 buildings in this image. If you see what he's done. He really spoke about this beautifully, that the idea of changing a color or maybe changing the roof form or changing the texture or changing shutters or no shutters, very small things. And then you begin to realize that's in fact how all of Charleston is made. So this building is actually the same as that building. And this building's the same as that building. And that building is the same as that building. But when you see them all side by side, it's unquestioned that they're all part of a coherent and beautiful streetscape. He showed us a few examples of that to make the point. I think it was wonderful. Again, buildings of many sizes, side by side. A scale that's more native to Charleston. Another one of Hugh's examples, a mirror image. Once you see it, then you see it. But if you didn't see it, you wouldn't realize exactly how this has been accomplished. But it's a reminder of that replicability that we're going to be working towards so that we can execute on the project with a scale that's really well thought out and then embellished through the details, through the ornament, through the roof forms. Another example here, Nate taking us through how Charleston singles might work using a similar format, a similar bone structure, but in some cases serving for retail, in some cases being elevated where we may be in a zone that requires elevation. As you can see, there's quite a few things. All of this has been created in the last few days, folks, so it's been a tremendous experience just being able to start to see a vision for an architecture of Charleston. We also talked about the street as well, the textures and the ornament, the doorways in particular. I will say, as we look at some of these details, we also learned and found that some of these details may in fact provide clues for some of the areas that we do have some elevation challenges that we'll need to work through. Some of the sites require elevation, maybe 5 feet or 6 feet or even more than that. But where a site requires a panel that can be opened, if it's a zone that has a jurisdictional flood requirement that has to be met, where the finished floor and the habitable spaces are up, that lower level ought to be designed in a way that's really beautiful. I think we've seen too much housing that's been elevated here in Charleston where the bottom is just very blank and very boring and very ugly, and I don't think that's good enough. So as we walk through the old neighborhood, even Rainbow Row presents examples of really beautiful gates and panels that you might say there's an area called the Limois, an area that requires a certain elevation, but what if it had one of the most beautiful street experiences as you walked around? And that those entrances, in fact, led you to upper level living spaces. And again, the gates can teach us that too as we walk around, that you have these great moments of human interaction from the building to the sidewalk. And those are really moments, those are artful moments in the city. So I want to thank William for putting together these examples to remind us that idea of art and beauty should persist in every example, regardless of technical requirements that may be there. Vince Graham also reminded us of Charleston's long tradition of sidewalk porticos and buildings that have, in fact, historically engaged the sidewalk, creating shade or creating opportunities for upper-level porches or maybe even upper-level living spaces. So I want to thank Vince for reminding us of that, too. As we think about this city at a human scale, the possibilities continue to open up in terms of what can be done. So I'm going to move to the sites, and as the week went on, we started to look at those 7 sites with the goal that we could come tonight with a lot of graphite on the back of our palms and share a premise so that we could start to test each of the sites around these principles that we've been discussing. So I'm going to do our tour. We'll start on the Western Peninsula and make our way around. And in fact start with West Edge here, which as you know, we'll be looking at infill on the parcels that are today a surface parking. I want to be clear as we do that, we are well aware of the need for parking in this area, that is something that does serve daily needs. So the study that we'll be doing is about how this land can best be used to serve the housing needs, but recognizing that there are opportunity areas in which to replace parking that's there today on those surface lots that are sort of very much underutilized, but a more efficient form of parking that could be used to replace that, along with existing parking resources that are, in fact, already in the neighborhood. So that is something that we will be studying. I just wanted to say that as we move ahead here. But our focus was to look at those underperforming sites and start to imagine a pattern of infill on those sites. So this is a diagram showing a range of building types. One of the things we began to understand about each of the sites was, of course, they're all in different parts of the city, and they have different sort of opportunities and obligations. And what I mean by that is that some sites that are vacant, that are not adjacent to, let's say, to historic buildings or to a neighborhood fabric, maybe just adjacent, they're just parking lots. The vision for those sites is going to be really important to create housing that develops a neighborhood character where there is not one today. There are other sites, and we'll talk about those as well, that are already very much in neighborhoods, that already have, in many cases, mature trees. So the context in those sites becomes much more of a design informant as we think about design. So I would say for this particular part of the West Edge area that are these open parking lots, the context, well, it's like a Walmart parking lot, so I don't think that's a context that we're working towards. So this is one area where we really started to look at the introduction of new streets, the connection of existing streets, the extension of Line Street over to Brittlebank Park. So building a network, as Vince spoke about so well on Wednesday, the importance of streets, getting those streets right. So what you're going to see really as a theme across all of these plans is you're going to see additional streets that are being added into the network. And you're going to see little cranks in those streets as well to create those moments where architecture can be seen not head on, but maybe just at a bit of an angle, which is also such a great gift in the way the historic city has been developed over time. So this is a diagram showing the infill on those West Edge parcels. That is near Gadsden Creek, I want to also be clear on that. We had some good conversations about that on Wednesday, that is in fact something that is not being built on, in the study here. So we've worked very carefully to take that feedback into the work that we were doing. We've started to visualize also taking some of the elevations and some of the plan studies that you saw before, imagining what some of these vast areas might look like as they become part of Charleston. They become parts of a more complete Charleston here on the peninsula. So this is a view down Fishburne Street, looking out toward the Ashley River, and imagining some of those somewhat larger format buildings, but broken into multiple pieces so that they're legible. And also, and I think Ben Pentry spoke really beautifully about this, but this idea that the skyline is also a varied skyline, so we don't have these very flat-topped buildings that we often see. I think all the award winners would get the prize for who had the most flat roof line. So you're not going to see any of that here. As we move over, also still in the Western Peninsula, Gadsden Green, again, build first so that some of the buildings that would be built in those parking areas would allow for residents to be able to move and stay right there in the neighborhood and start to allow redevelopment of these older homes that are in desperate need of redevelopment and replacement, to bring them into a character and a form that is more compatible with all of the surrounding area, and to create that mixed use and mixed income format. So this is a study for that site. And here, it is very much adjacent to existing historic fabric. So this takes a context approach that starts to break buildings down to even smaller pieces. In fact, that one facade that I showed you that showed all the smaller buildings side by side was an imagined view of what that might look like as we look at Allway Street toward just to the north. But then sort of building along the edge, building along Harmon Field, creating a beautiful streetscape there that allows the neighbors and the residents to be able to enjoy some of the open space. The thing about the West Edge area, there are tremendous amounts of park space there that could be much better used. So this is a plan, again, introducing streets that allow a true Charleston scale to be developed, and even alleys and mid-blocks, connections through the blocks, so that everything is really framed around a walkable and human scale. All right, I'm going to move over to the Ragboro Homes area on the Central Peninsula. It's the area just off of East Bay Street. And this is a study for that area. This as well is one of those areas where it is very much in an established neighborhood of the city. And there are, in fact, a wonderful group of trees sort of block by block there that we want to be very careful about. So working at that smaller scale to create an infill pattern that really meshes with all the surrounding neighborhood around it, so it's sort of indistinguishable as we look at this as, as a future mixed use and mixed income community. One component of that site is, in fact, fronting along East Bay Street, and that provides an opportunity, as you'll see, for some slightly larger buildings that front onto that larger street that look out over, in that case, Columbus Terminal. So each of these sites, these are all very early studies to understand what the sites can hold, but also to do it in a way that's sympathetic with the existing conditions and the context that's there. This is a view looking at the corner of America Street and South Street. Again, it's a reminder that the character and the form of these older buildings that are ready to be replaced are not really a scale and a character of Charleston. So imagining that view to redevelop around a scale that is more familiar, more incremental in its design. This is that very corner, imagining on that corner a corner store with flats above it, single houses just to the left, and then apartments to the left of that, new streets connecting back through there, but working with the canopy that's there today. There are actually some wonderful moments too where existing trees have grown to create these pathways and walkways, imagining that those could in fact be redeveloped in a more compact way, but thinking of those in the tradition of Charleston alleys. You can imagine that that canopy stays just where it is, but we bring buildings a bit closer to that, but bring the scale down so you have smaller homes, maybe a single residence or two residences or side-by-side homes. Some of the lessons that we learned out in the field from some of the oldest buildings. So we move to the Central Peninsula. This is Meeting Street Manor Extension. And here we've been looking at, really there's two sites on this image. There's Meeting Street Manor Extension, which is here between Conroy and Romney and between Meeting and Nassau Street. And that is very much in the mode of being sort of designed around the context of that site. And then the larger sites at 993 and 995 Morrison Drive being designed in a way where vision sort of leads in that case, because it is sort of a large cleared open site. There are no trees on that site today. So establishing street connections and establishing a network of pedestrian scaled movement through that block. The Central Peninsula, this is looking at 823 Meeting Street up near Mount Pleasant Street. This is a city property that we've been studying, which is located here at 823 Meeting, the old Coca-Cola bottling plant there. And how that historic building could be woven into a redevelopment that helps to engage Meeting Street, helps to create an important view along that Meeting Street sightline as you're heading south onto the peninsula, that long sightline, which just has a little one-story warehouse today. But then also importantly, remembering the route of the low line here and having an opportunity for new buildings that can front onto the low line to create safety and activity along that particular frontage, that new public frontage here in Charleston. And then looking at other ways in which buildings can activate that space and start to blend down into the scale that's nearby. So those are the considerations the designers have been taking as they've looked at these sites one at a time to start to test what can be done there. 899 UG Street. This is right there at Morrison Drive. Again, one of the sites that we studied. And here you can see an infill plan that can be done on that site as well. Again, taking the opportunity to create a bit of a more formal frontage, a little more presence on Morrison Drive where it can handle more scale. Actually, in this case, creating a reserve for a civic building that can line up along the new street being created in the neighborhood just as we head just south, the Meeting Street Manor area, the Cooper River Courts area. So again, too, we're also, as we're studying these sites, whether it's a CHA site or a City of Charleston site or a county partnership site or a West Edge site, the adjacencies are really remarkable. You start to see how we have this moment to kind of think about all of this collectively and see how one site can, in fact, support the other site and create a more beautiful whole for it. And this is one example where we began to see how both those sites really work beautifully together. And then coming back up to 993, 995, and I touched on this already, this is really now just focusing on that site and the infill pattern that I described there. This is another visualization, imagining that view looking back over Singleton Park toward the site, which is just beyond. So we are on Conroy Street here, and looking out, this is Hanover, that's Conroy. So imagining what that might look like with new residential infill to help make that a more complete part of the city, to provide needed housing, but also hopefully to create a beautiful frontage on the park that's made of multiple elements that create scale, that create movement in the skyline, and also create, to the extent that we can, a beautiful street front with multiple entrances, and even the areas that, in this case, that need to be elevated have beautiful panels that move through the neighborhood. So we're activating the residential environment there along the street, even considering how porticos, those sidewalk porticos, could help to animate and activate that street pattern there. And then thirdly, moving to the Eastern Peninsula, this is sort of moving down now to the Meeting Street, Manor, Cooper River Courts sites. We started to look at that area, which is really, an important part of this of the whole plan, really, and an area in which many of the street patterns are in place, but could be divided down again to create more opportunities for housing and more frontages. So this is looking at that area, mapping every single tree into it as well, and then starting to create that pattern that I've been describing that is more driven by the context of the site, and working with smaller building footprints within the neighborhood to be able to work with the unique conditions of those blocks and of those trees that are there. So you see that pattern sort of in the neighborhood. And then as we move out toward Morrison Drive, the opportunity for some larger buildings that can front onto Morrison Drive that are still manageable in their scale, but provide sort of that edge to the neighborhood fronting onto to that busier street. And a view here sort of in the heart of the neighborhood, looking through it, imagining that the great bone structure of those streets sort of growing up, becoming even more complete as homes sort of come to the back of sidewalk where we expect to see them throughout the city. So that's our call to action. I wanted to share those scans. Those are literally just off the drawing boards, but gets back to where we began on Monday. The lessons are here, remembering the great street frontages, developing incrementally, remembering the importance of a beautiful skyline, mixed scales of buildings, entrances incrementally, active street fronts, and remembering that idea of quality and durability in everything that we do. So we're thinking on a 100-year scale here. So the precedents are here. They grow from this foundation. These are where the building types begin. And as we work today, we're in the service of our forebears and sort of really teaching us how these buildings can support the future. So architecture must be great and must be of Charleston, in summary. And that we remember everything that we do here is for the human person. The human analogy is present in all work. So we know this to be true. It's been a great gift to have a chance to work together with the community over this week. We do want input. We're going to do some question and answers now. We will also go back out to the parlor afterward. But I do want to draw your attention. There are comment cards. Maybe you got one when you came in. So there are comment cards on either on your seats or there at the front entrance. And then there will be an opportunity for input as well through the city's Project 3500 website. So please keep that in mind as well. All of these talks, all this activity will be posted there. That's a snapshot there of the feedback card for tonight. So without further ado, I want to thank you all for being a great audience, and we're looking forward to taking questions.
So we've got a few minutes. Wanted to just give another opportunity for people to ask some questions if they'd like before we go out into the hall. I think we have some mics that we can walk around to different people. So if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. We got lady in the red, and then you there in the middle, right?
Hi, I'm Margaret. I wanted to say thank you so much first for having the comment cards tonight. I really appreciate it. It sounds like you guys were really listening to that. That was a concern of mine. I think that as a whole, everyone in here, not everyone, but many of us are very homogenous, very able to
Yeah.
So we're all kind of able to be here in an opera house at 5 o'clock
projects themselves are going to contain the parking that they need within them, right? So I think what you're talking about are the people that are parking the 1,000 or so cars that are in the Walmart parking lot right now, right? That are used by MUSC, that are used by the River Dogs, that are used by the Citadel, and so we have been pretty focused on that in that we've identified several other sites that there's going to need to be a large parking structure built there. There's no question. But when you have MUSC, when you have the Citadel, when you have the River Dogs, when you have that being the ending point of the LCRT, so there's CHATS money, there's CARTA money, there's COG money. I mean, those are all kind of the same thing. But there's funding and use that would warrant, I think, a pretty large scale parking structure there. So that's kind of the idea. Where exactly it's going to go, we don't know yet. I was very firm with the design team. We need to be thinking about that, but we're not designing around a parking structure. So in fairness, that was my call to them, but we are well aware. I can assure you, I have heard from a variety of people, particularly the River Dogs, that they want to make sure that there is parking for their events. And I completely respect where they're coming from. But as I said earlier, there is certainly the economics and the demand that would warrant a parking structure in that area so that they're not parking in your neighborhood. So we got you right, yeah, there we go.
Can we try the microphone again?
With regard to affordability, we've heard in perpetuity, rental, and then are we hearing correctly for sale, affordability, in perpetuity?
Yes. Well, so yes. So these would be permanently restricted, and generally speaking, I would say the majority of them are going to be rental. In part, there's some, particularly with the Housing Authority, there's some restrictions that go with those properties through HUD. But on city-owned property, you can do fee simple, and that's where one of the things that we really liked were these small units that I think could be, again, replicated pretty easily. I mean, to build one of them would be pretty expensive, but to build 300 of them would be a lot more cost-effective, right? So those would be potential examples of things that could be sold because it is essential that we have ownership within these projects as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you for this presentation. I appreciate the amount of care that is being put into this to make it feel like Charleston, have it be human scale, walkable, incorporate spaces that aren't just, from the post-1950s automotive age.
Right.
And I'm hoping that, as this idea develops, we'll also be looking at the types of design that occurred before air conditioning, when buildings were made significantly more efficiently to manage temperature and things like that. How are we ensuring that the potential for solar on rooftops, or that sea breezes, or the facing of the building to ensure efficiency of the buildings, and the way the footprint is managing water coming off the roofs into Charleston-style gardens or walkways, is ensuring that these places are beautiful and resilient at the
Right.
same time.
Yeah. Look, I think I'll let Christian speak to it. I mean, there was certainly some.
Amen.
Right. Upset. Right. No. This kind of takes me to what the next steps are. I mean, this has been an incredibly informative process going through it. It's brought up a lot of questions, and that's what we need in order for this to be a success. You really need to put something on paper, test it, get other people's perspective. But here's the deal, folks. I do want to make this point, and it's very important. This is going to be incredibly difficult. There are a lot of reasons why this won't work. There are a lot of people that are convinced it won't work. But it's that kind of attitude that will stop it. But I mean, if we have confidence and we see the beauty in this, and we know that there is a way economically to do this, then we need to lean in. And when we run into problems, and we're going to run into a lot of them, you need to figure it out and then keep moving forward. And you need to keep sustainability, you need to keep beauty as your compass. And I think that's not going to be hard given what I think our ethos is here. So again, this is going to be a community effort. This is not just going to come from the city of Charleston or from the private sector. This is going to require you all to lean in. I know you all have, many of you all have some suspicions or some worries, and they're all probably very legitimate, right? But as Christian pointed out, this is a draft. From here, we're going to talk to the neighborhoods. We're going to talk to the community. So when we start going from watercolor, that you see up here, to CAD, we're going to have a lot of input. And then we're going to still run into problems. I'm not going to keep belaboring the problems, but we are going to have them. But it's just important to have that vision, that drive, that confidence, frankly, that we can do this, because I believe very strongly that we can and we need to. Sorry, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, lady in, okay.
Councilman Waring and Appel said I had to speak up. My name is Mary Koster. I'm a born and raised Charlestonian, ancestor of hardworking German Lutheran immigrants who founded St. John's Lutheran Church. Mr. Mayor, I applaud your efforts to say that we will have no displacement. Let's remember you said that Charleston was built by many hands. They were built by many black hands. And that the people who are most likely to be displaced and who have been displaced and whose properties are most at risk now are our historic African American communities. What I also applaud is that you lifted up the importance of eliminating risk, and yet we're not really speaking about the elephant in the room, which is Charleston's profound flood hazard risk, especially in our African American settlement communities that have had their salt marshes paved over. We know, we haven't had any environmental engineers yet speak to this, and I'm sure that's part of your plan, because you've got brilliant people on your staff that will help you with that. But when we propose to put buildings on even one blade of salt marsh, we invite flood hazard risk. So you showed some buildings on Gadsden Creek. There were fully 2 acres of Gadsden Creek that had buildings on them. We know that a single acre of salt marsh can store up to 1 million gallons of storm water and attenuate storm surge risk. When we talk about gates in the limited area of moderate wave action, we're talking about storm surge. We also know that if we build in any of these areas that are in our special flood hazard risk, which, by the way, our Charleston Water Plan said we should not build in, they're going to have to be elevated 2 feet above base floor elevation. So in this room, if we take this amazing vision that you have for beauty, aesthetics, working together, not displacing people, I would please implore you that we put our safety first.
Sure. So it's a great point, and as I said earlier, besides traffic, it's affordability and flooding, right? And so a lot of work has been done on the west edge, and it's frankly been done through a few different studies, right? There's, of course, been the water plan, but then there's the Army Corps plan, then there's the Haygood Avenue plan. So a lot of analysis has been done on the water, and you're absolutely right, particularly there, but on the east side as well. We have to be very aggressive about addressing that. But what you have to look at too, and this is really important, you can't just look at one project and it not be related to another project. So if you build the battery extension, for example, or excuse me, when we build the battery extension, because the Army Corps is chomping at the bit to move forward on this front, that will actually help address a lot of the tidal flooding that comes in through Gadsden Creek, because you can have a gate there. You can control the flow, right? And then what you need to address is the stormwater flooding, which is pretty significant in that area. And that's a different calculation and a different analysis. But what we're seeing up here tonight, and I want everybody to be very clear about this, our stormwater manual, the City of Charleston's stormwater manual, is the most aggressive stormwater, one of the most aggressive, if not the most aggressive stormwater manual in the country. And I'll give my compliments to my predecessor, John Tecklenburg, for seeing the need for that and putting forth that very strict policy. So when you're building in an area like this, not only make it net neutral in terms of the runoff in the stormwater, you actually need to improve it by 20%. And I can assure you and I can promise you that what we're doing here is going to abide by our own manual. Now, we're going to get into the details about and design related to all of this as we go to CAD, but I respect where you're coming from, and I'm sure, and I know, you will be having a watchful eye on this, no doubt. Right? That's right. Who's next? Yes, ma'am, in the white right here. Perfect. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's really the elephant in the room. But again, so as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a challenge, but generally speaking, as I said earlier, a lot of affordable units in today's world actually cost more than market rate units. So this is going to be a combination effort between HUD and working with them to not change their rules, but to create a pilot program with them. And that's a huge source of capital, right? And they are open. We were up there this past week, as a matter of fact, and they are not only open to it, but excited by it because they're looking for creative paths forward. But then there's also the factor that I mentioned earlier, economies of scale. And this gets a little bit into the weeds, folks, but one of the things that these guys had as their directive and works really well for Charleston is that a lot of these buildings that you see, these beautiful buildings, are very, very, very simple structures. They're boxes. They're rectangles and they're squares, right? And that's what Charleston is. That's what a Charleston single house is, right? So that's a very cost-effective thing to build. Now, again, aesthetically, when you're talking about the finishes and all of that, one of these units versus one of the ugly units that we saw would, generally speaking, be cheaper to build the ugly units. But when you build 5,000 of these, you start to get economies of scale. So that's one important point. And then the third thing I would say is, again, back to capital markets. And this is something, a world that I spent 25 years in, real estate development. And where a lot of costs come into projects is risk and uncertainty. So capital markets, when they look at something that, all right, well, I've got a maybe on this one, and it might take 5 years to get my money to start earning interest. Well, if you're telling me this is going to be ready day one, in other words, we're going to give a permit set, you can start construction, and there's a huge demand for this in terms of you're not worried about it absorbing per se, right? Well, then their cost of capital on, say, a $100 million equity fund, instead of it being looking for a 6 or 7% yield, they might say, we'll take a 4% yield. Well, that's a huge difference, right? So these are things that, again, we're going to have to test this, but I'll give you one just not anecdotal but very factual. We took these concepts and gave them to a large-scale manufacturer of concrete. And we said, look, give us a price for one of these boxes. Right? What's it going to cost on a per square foot basis? And they gave us a price. And said, okay, if you did 200 of these, what would it cost? And the number dropped by 30%. So that is a combination of all those different things is how we hope and feel confident that we can make the numbers work here. We got time for two more. We've got your hand was up first beforehand, and then I'll go to one of you all over there. So Chloe, if you can come down here.
Thank you. I want to just raise a totally different issue that seems to have gotten lost. I live very near Gadsden Green, and I've got neighbors and friends there. And as you know, it's unsustainably low density, but everybody has a balcony, and everybody can walk out the door into a green space. Everybody has a place to work on their car. Kids can spend the time outside. I'm worried that a high-density that may be appropriate downtown where you have sort of affluent, childless families and retired people might be a little constraining for families with a lot of kids who need breathing space and areas to run around and hang out and stuff.
Well, fair enough, but as somebody that grew up downtown with a lot of kids, it was an ideal place to be as a child. And so I respect where you're coming from, but I do think that these properties, these areas, I mean, the whole peninsula, I think, is a built environment that seems to work, right? And we certainly are taking into account public spaces and making sure that they are protected, like Martin Park. We're not touching. We're creating little pocket parks within these developments, and those actually make a huge difference. So again, I understand where you're coming from. There's going to be certainly trade-offs. I mean, I respect that. But I think, again, we don't have an option. We have to do something, and it's kind of what do we do? And one of the things that I'm a big believer in is you don't go in halfway. You go all in. And when you do it, you set it up for success by beautiful design and something that is grounded in economics. All right, so yes, absolutely. We got one more, one on the lady in the flower, sorry. And then I want to kind of talk a little bit about next steps.
My name is Shelley Clark Glidewell, and I'm an architect in town. And you talk about the AutoCAD in the future. We noticed that you have brought in an architect from England, and we're just wondering, are local architects been involved in the actual development of the rest of the plans?
So it's a great question. I mean, again, well, certainly local architects have been engaged in giving feedback and have been participating. But it's not just architects, local contractors, local businesses engaging in this process. That is something that we are going to strongly encourage. So I think it's a good segue for me to kind of go into, Christian, if you'll give me the podium, because I got to make sure I cover my notes here. What I see is the next steps. So again, we talked about taking this from watercolors to CAD. I will tell you that one of the drum rolls here was, and something that these guys really worked hard on, was out of all of those properties, right, what is the total unit count, right? How many did we get to? Did we get to 5,000? Are we able to replace everything that is there in terms of the housing authority property? And the answer is yes. We were actually able to get almost 6,000 units total. So that replaces, I think there was a concern from somebody last Wednesday about, is there going to be enough? And the answer is yes. So we're going to have to, bring in the engineering to that and make sure that flushes out. So we're going to, vet all that down. But I think it looks like we have a pretty good margin there, which is great. Next, we're going to determine an aggregate schedule because, this is pretty complicated, right? So working out, how this is going to get from not just from these watercolors to completion. So in essence, a Gantt chart on steroids. We're also going to need to work through, we have a lot of partnership structures to work through. Like we've have a great working relationship with Charleston County. We've got Councilman Wehrman here. He's been a great champion of affordable housing in our community and been great to work with there. But exactly how that deal is going to be worked out, I think we have a pretty good roadmap for that. But also West Edge Foundation and absolutely the Housing Authority, and what those deal points are, and then what we're going to go out to the private sector on. So there's going to be a lot of legal work in here that is not going to be quite as much fun, candidly, but is incredibly important. So working on those structures, working with HUD on the pilot program that they have gotten excited about, digging into those. We're also going to have to figure out the exact phasing of this, again, to make sure that there is no relocation. But also just logistically, I mean, how are you going to do 3 different projects with potentially 3 different joint venture partners and stage them to where they're not eating up all the subs in the market, for example, right? I mean, but this is ultimately going to result in about 1,000 units a year, and is what it kind of the absorption will end up looking like. So the phasing, and then it's logistics on utilities, on DOT, working with them. I mean, all the really boring stuff and beating your head against the wall, but they're very important things when you're developing something as large and as complicated as this. So all that has to be flushed out. And where we're looking to go is to get to 35% design drawings, right? So we have a lot of control over the design and the place. And then we will release an RFQ, so bringing in the private sector to come in as we finish the drawings, go full DD and through construction drawings, because we want them to have a say in the final product, right? So, and I'll tell you this, in terms of what we're looking for from the private sector, the beauty contest, if you will be judged, of course, on experience. We do want to make sure that people have some expertise in this building in particular. Their cost of capital, I mean, that's another really important part. A lot of the groups that we're talking to have big institutional capital, either on their balance sheet, or they have strong relationships. So we want to say, okay, if you're going to go raise a $250 million fund for this, what's your yield going to be? We want to know all the details, because in essence, by putting the land in, we and the housing authority, and potentially the county, I think they're going to go more for a sale, we're an LP partner. We're part of the economics, right? So that's going to be some more legal work. And then, again, once on board, we're going to finalize the design drawings, go back to the schedule, and launch. And so when will that happen? My target is no later than by the end of the year. And I just gave some of my staff a heart attack. But again, guys, I mean, we got to lean in here. This is something that is critical to our community, to our next 100 years, and who and what we are as a city. And I'll wrap up by saying that we've talked all about the peninsula. I do want to just make one caveat that, or just clarifying point, that we do need to have affordable housing off the peninsula. It needs to be on Johns Island. It needs to be on James Island. It needs to be West Ashley. What we need to do is have more people living closer to where they work, so that they're not always getting in their car and driving for everything that they might need. So this is highly focused on the peninsula, and a lot of that, and Christian pointed out, he had one error in his presentation. I got to give a shout out to our city staff. It wasn't Bloomberg that did the real deep analysis on all the city-owned sites and all the publicly owned sites. It was City of Charleston employees that did that work. And it really is an incredible amount of work that is pretty fascinating, where they rated every property based on flooding, based on zoning, based on trees, based on access to public transportation, based on location within job centers. They rated them all. And generally speaking, because of its density, and it's a huge job center, the peninsula had the highest rating, or properties on the peninsula had the highest rating. So again, a lot of thought has been gone into this. We really appreciate all of you all's input. We appreciate and respect your concerns, your observations, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And we will be doing just that over the next several weeks and months, going out and taking this show on the road. So again, thanks to everybody for participating. Again, really want to compliment Christian Sotil for leading this effort with Josh Martin and other staff members for the city. And again, thank you all for your participation. And I think Christian's ready to go have a drink and take a nap. So we're going to wrap up, guys. Thank you.